Very good. So the next talk is by Alison Hale from the University of Warwick, and the talk is intriguingly titled, "It all starts with just one loop, but where does it end?" So thanks, Alison.
Oh, thank you. So I'm, as was just introduced, I'm based at the University of Warwick, and it's my pleasure at the moment to be the software engineer for the Juniper Partnership. Juniper Partnership is an, if you're not aware of it, many of you will be, is an open network of infectious disease epidemiologists, and I'm sure that the PIs, Matt and Julia and Kira, would also like to, we'll let you know about it if you'd like to know more. So I've got a background in business, was where I originally learnt my software engineering skills prior to going to university and doing a degree. So I worked in business and engineering for some time before I came to university to do a degree. And when I did go to university to do a degree, I did physics because I thought doing software engineering would drive me mad because I'd done it in the real world. So this is nothing amazing about this. This is something that we're all very familiar with. It's true in industry, business, and of course in epidemiology. There's some data, some analysis is done, some results, and consumer here is just supposed to be whoever it is who happens to want to see those results in whatever form they happen to take. Now, software engineering is not something that should be happening in isolation. It's an integral part of that. And I think we don't always give enough thought to quite how we're going to include that. Sometimes as separate software engineers, sometimes it's the person, quite often it's the epidemiologist who's writing the software. And so I'm just going to talk a bit more about software development and really how that sort of will go through. So software, like anything else, has a life cycle. It begins and at some point it ends. How long it lasts for will probably depend what sort of software it is. If you've just written one little function, you might use it a lot, or you might use it never again. But whatever it is, at some point, however formal or informal, it will be designed, perhaps formally or perhaps informally in your mind, if it's only a very short piece of code. You're going to implement it. Definitely it should be tested and evaluated. I'm not always sure that that actually happens. I'll come on to a bit more about that in a moment. And depending on the context, presumably you may need to maintain the piece of software or the piece of code. Even if it's one function in Python, you still might need to maintain it if it uses a library that's then updated. And version control, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. That's stopping us getting in a muddle. So we've all been in this situation, me included. You start writing a few lines of code, few loops, perhaps some if statements, some else statements, some for loops, and all of a sudden you've got hundreds of lines of code, and you may have spent hundreds of hours writing it. But what sort of code and what sort of state is it in? This could be a problem. So let's think a little bit about that. Is the code you've written readable? What were the names in it you used for your variables? You know, did we have X, Y, A, B, C, double X, and double Z? You come back a week later, never mind a month later, and scratching your head wondering what on earth it was you did Friday afternoon 3 weeks ago. So certainly variable names would probably, hopefully, can help with the readability, and also plenty of comments in the code. And if it's going to be a significant piece of code, particularly if it's going to be a software package, definitely you'd want some documentation. But even if it's not an actual software package and you've just written a model which you're then going to give to somebody else, unless that piece of code is going to be a black box, which then might get abused if they don't understand all the assumptions that maybe went into the mathematical modelling, but perhaps also assumptions that have gone into how it's being coded can also cause problems. So the code needs to be both readable and documented in the context of what's appropriate for the situation that you're in. So there should be some testing. So you've written this lovely piece of code. Does it work? So there's many ways of testing, and you could write your test before you write your code. That's one methodology. You could write some code and then write some unit tests so that if you ever update the code and it breaks, that'll maybe help you realise that. So testing here on the slide is the software functioning as it should? But something that I've found through my careers in different places is that not a lot of people tend to think about numerically benchmarking the code. If we could solve it analytically, we would have done it analytically. But we're usually, particularly in epidemiology, certainly, turn to the computer because we can't do it by hand. So how can you numerically benchmark the code? Well, you can by choosing restricted regimes usually, but that's a whole other seminar and we're not going to go into that now. But so testing that it actually does what it's supposed to in one sense, but also testing that numerically it is working as it is intended, at least so far as you could actually test it. If the code's written well, if it's been sectioned out into different pieces, rather than just one big sort of scribbly sort of spaghetti something, it's written properly, you should be able to adapt it and extend it in the future. That can be very useful and it can save a lot of time because it can save you needing to go back to the drawing board and start again, which is not necessarily helpful and it wastes time. So it's something to bear in mind, even if you're just writing a small amount of code, if you're going to need to use that again, then make sure that it's written well enough so it can be. But another thing that we should bear in mind is, so we wrote a piece of code and we saved it under the file name my model. And then we thought, maybe I'm going to adapt that. So you save it and so you write another bit of code, my model new. And then you write another piece of code, you think, I've adapted it for my model new. And then you think, oh no, I didn't like that one, I preferred new rather than new. So my model new. And before you know where you are, even probably on the same day or the same week, you've forgotten which was the one you actually wanted. So there are formal methods for version control, which is exactly what that is, to get around that problem. And personally, I use Git to do that. But certainly I have been in the situation where I've written some code and gone back 3 weeks later and think, well, which file was the bit in that I actually wanted? So I would definitely recommend version control. That's, I think, again, it saves time. And that's what we should be doing, I'm sure. Are the results reproducible? Well, if they're not, there's clearly something wrong. But we also have tests and procedures in place to make sure that that actually is the case. So we've written this nice piece of code, and perhaps we're going to give it to somebody else to use. And then maybe a year or two passes. But can we actually maintain it? Because if we can't, then we could be in trouble. So is there somebody around who knows how that code works properly, who can maintain it, or can we give it to someone else who can maintain it? But they're not going to be able to maintain it, certainly not a different person, if it wasn't readable and documented in the first place, and properly tested. So we should definitely think about that. And the other thing, certainly in terms of academics, we probably would want to make our code publicly available, or may wish to make it publicly available. Publishing in a journal, now it can be more the case where you would want to actually maybe include, not the code in the journal obviously, but you might want to include some links out to maybe GitHub or somewhere where that's actually stored. And I think a lot of these things, our work as epidemiologists is a lot of the time based on these codes. But if we don't get that software engineering, if we don't get that foundation right, we're wasting time, wasting money, wasting resources that we didn't need to necessarily. And we spent hundreds of hours doing something at midnight when we probably didn't need to. So where should it end? Well, I think software engineering needs to be a much more central part, perhaps, of what we're doing. More attention, I think, needs to be given to it. How we integrate that into the codes that we're writing as epidemiologists, how we're, and just to sort of just bring the whole thing together. Because from that diagram, I mean, there's a lot of software that may need to be written. Data might need to be cleaned. The analysis, well, deterministic, statistic, stochastic, you know, inference. This could be very, very long bits of code producing results. But as we've just been hearing, who are those results going to? You know, have we created the data file that somebody else, perhaps a policymaker, could use to create their own figure? Or have we created one that we thought was really nice, but only our scientific colleagues could understand? Not going to be a lot of use if we wanted to convey something to somebody else. So even at that end, we need a decent sort of software so that we're actually doing something sort of consistent and right. So I think the main message is we need more software engineering. So thank you for your time.
Great. So we've got a few minutes for questions now, if anyone has any questions for Alison. Seb, please.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So you're saying we need more software engineering, and then to me that immediately leads to the question of how. So do we need research software engineers that we integrate into the research process and that we sort of task with doing these things that you laid out? Or do we need to train ourselves and other epidemiologists better at all of this so that we can perform all these tasks?
I think we need both. I think we need software engineers to help train the epidemiologists to run their code better, in a sense. I think it depends entirely on the situation, what the funding situation, particularly if we're talking about academia here. But ideally, I think that, you know, even if a software engineer came along, if you'd written really tangled code that wasn't in functions and it was just sort of some long sort of, like this, you know, it's going to take them time to untangle it. So the better the code starts off, even if it does need sanitizing at the end, or even if there is training that needs. I think we need both. We need external people, well, not external, we need software engineers. Because a software engineer might not be trained in epidemiology and might not be mathematically trained, or not mathematically trained to such a high degree. So there needs, you know, it really is an interface of two things. And we probably need to work quite hard at getting that right. And no two situations are going to be the same.
Matt?
So, I mean, it sounds like you've been looking at my code with a lot of it.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, very often, you know, most academics will write a bit of code because, oh, someone wants to know something and I'll do this quick. And then at some point I'll come back and write it nicely, and we never do. When should we start? Or the other thing we do is we start with good intentions and then we need to change it to do something, and we change it and then forget what we've done. How do we actually structure things so that we do things right from the beginning and keep going forwards? When's that flip point between doing it quick and doing it so that it's this living resource?
I think it's very difficult in the real world because, as you say, sometimes there's time pressure. Someone needs to know something very quickly and you might have to write your code very quickly. But I think it's also about just being aware and thinking maybe before we're even starting. So if someone says to me, I want such and such, in my mind already I'm thinking, how are we going to sort of structure this and maybe get it towards where we want it? I agree, in the real world you may never come back, and you probably won't come back and untangle it. So if it can be better in the first place, and if you did need to come back, then hopefully it would be easier to understand again. But it's hard, and I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
Justin?
So, do you have thoughts on, you know, like having a history of software engineering as well, I very much agree with you, but do you have thoughts on how we align academic incentive structures and academic funding structures to actually support good software engineering?
I think that's a work in progress, isn't it? we do need that. I mean, if you were doing an experiment in a lab, if you were applying for funding to do it, you would ask for the lab equipment. I'm not saying software engineering is lab equipment, but it is a resource that you may well need, and perhaps we need to have maybe a bit of a shift in the culture, a bit of a shift in the understanding, how we go about that, how we achieve that. I'm not 100% sure, but it does seem at the moment that we probably need a bit more of a shift in that direction, and I'm not sure it's that easy. I think it may be happening a bit. I think more universities are having software engineers in the fields. It is actually happening to some degree, but it's a change in culture, and that takes time.
There's time for one more question, I think, down the
Okay,
front.
thanks very much, Alison. That was great, because I've come from medicine and then a bit of modelling and then been dragged into sort of software engineering by my own postdoc, which is fantastic. So just to add to your talk, one of my postdocs did a paper on reproducibility of modelling during the COVID era, and there's a bunch of people who didn't even publish their code at all, which is the one group. There was a group who clearly wanted to publish their code, and they made links available and so on. But when you went to run it, it didn't run. So I would say just as an added comment is, if you actually care about people reproducing your work and your code, use one of those sort of virgin virtual machine things and make sure it runs, because most people just think that their software works because it works on their machine, and there's always like a function missing or a tiny bit of data that could have been shared that wasn't, or that sort of thing. So that's what we found in our
Docker is one of the ways of doing that. Yes, that is a very good point, actually.
Yeah, there's often just a missing function that they made themselves that they forgot to transfer over to the GitHub link. But anyway, a lot of people are really trying hard to share their code, but just missing the mark just by a little bit.
Yeah, Docker is one of the environments for doing that in, which allows you to do just that, because then you can run it in that environment again, and then it should run in that environment. But yes, you're right. If you transfer it across between computers and different versions, I mean, a language like Python has libraries coming out all the time, and it only takes one of those to be updated with a slightly different argument in a function, and suddenly nothing works.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks very much. We could thank Alison again. Thank you.